Hello, everyone. Welcome to the PwC Tax Bite podcast series. My name is still Pieter, and I'm very happy that I can invite two speakers today around the topic of DAX 7. DAX 7, many of you may wonder, what is that exactly? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this podcast, what it is, what the impact is, and why this is relevant for all of you. I'm not going to do that by myself. I invited two experts in my recording studio for that. First of all, I have Niels Dont with me. Niels is, besides being a member of our indirect tax team, also an expert in DAX 7, but also focuses on e-invoicing and e-reporting. So he's actually part of the center of excellence we have around these topics in Belgium. But so he's also very deep into the topic of DAX 7. So I invited him to discuss about it today. But also Jeroen Aerts is here. Jeroen is actually a member of our technology and AI team in PwC and works a lot with data and processes around tax reporting. DAX 7, as you will learn in the podcast, is a tax reporting, a lot to do with data. So I think I want Jeroen's views also on the processes and the challenges around that. But before we start with that, first of all, let's recap, Niels, maybe. What is DAX 7 for the audience? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Thank you, Pieter, and also thanks for having us on this topic. So indeed, a short, brief recap on what DAX 7 is. So DAX 7 is an EU indeed reporting obligation applicable to so-called platform operators. Platform operators that are operating a platform, a digital platform, which can be an application, a website, or any other IT platform, which allows for the or facilitates the connection between so-called sellers, which can be natural persons, but also legal entities, and buyers for the carrying out of a so-called relevant activity. There are 4 relevant activities. We have the sale of goods, so the online marketplaces. We have the personal services, for example, the platforms where riders can deliver you your food at your door. We have the rental of immovable property, so the platforms that allow you to rent out your apartment, for example, or the rental of any mode of transport. So it's a yearly reporting obligation. It already applies as from 2023, applicable both to EU and non-EU platform operators. The view on the revenues that were being generated on these platforms. So that's why they introduced this EU reporting obligation to allow also the governments to have a better view on those revenues and allow them to also assess whether those revenues were going to be reported by the sellers. So that on the scopes, indeed, platforms allowing for sellers to be connected with buyers for the carrying out of a relevant activity.
So, Niels, I get it. So I think for authorities, this can bring extremely interesting information. People renting out or making sales via websites, via this system. The authorities will be aware of that. I understand also clearly it is the platform which is in scope and which we will have to do the reporting. I imagine also in some cases there are exceptions. Not all platforms must be subject to the reporting obligation. What exceptions do there exist in this respect?
No, good question indeed. So the definition of who is in scope of DAX 7 is very broad. So that's something that I want to make clear. But of course, also some exceptions or exclusions are included in the legislation. For example, a platform that exclusively allows for processing of payments relating to a relevant activity, that's not a platform that is in scope. Also, a platform that exclusively allows for users to list or advertise a relevant activity is also not in scope. So, for example, a purely advertisement website, not allowing sellers and buyers to really come into contact relating to the advertisement, that is not in scope. Also, a platform that exclusively allows for redirecting or transferring users to another platform, that is also not in scope. So 3 exclusions specifically included in the legislation, but as mentioned, need to be interpreted very restrictively. It needs to be the only exclusive activity on the platform. So for example, relating to the advertisement, if you have a website that allows me to post an advertisement relating to a sale of goods or a personal service of mine, and they allow for a chat function, for example, then even the platform can become into scope of DAX 7, as this can be seen as being able to facilitate a connection between a seller and a buyer. I think also one important element here as well is that if the platform or the platform needs to be aware of the revenues that are being generated on the platform. So for example, if you as a platform operator do not have a view on the revenues that are generated on your platform, then it can be that your platform is not in scope, but also here, this needs to be interpreted very restrictively. For example, if you as a platform collect some kind of commission on the revenue that's generated on the platform, then this can be seen that the platform should be aware, reasonably be aware of the revenues, and then you're still in scope of DAX 7.
Yeah. So Niels, in the discussions with a lot of companies in this respect, I think an example, a question I often get is, I have a platform, I create an online platform where I offer my own products to different potential customers. And in addition to that, I also allow other related products to be sold via my platform. Would such a platform be in scope, Niels?
That's indeed a good nuance. So if I, as a business, have a website where I sell my own goods to customers, that's not a website or platform that is meant under DAX 7 or in scope under DAX 7. Now, in the other situation, where I, as for example, a head office or head entity, operate a platform allowing related entities within my group to sell their goods, then it can be that your website is in scope of DAX 7. So important nuance, if it relates to your own goods, then that's not in scope of DAX 7. But if it relates to other entities that are selling their own goods, then it's potentially in scope. And I think also here it's important that, and that's linked to this, that it needs to relate to third-party sellers. So that's on the sale of goods, but also on the personal service. It needs to be third-party sellers, meaning that it cannot be employees of your business that are offering their services on your website. That is not in scope of DAX 7.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Niels. I think that clarifies a lot. So I think often, I think when we have discussions with companies on is my platform in scope, often surprisingly some platforms are in scope. So I think indeed exceptions have to be interpreted narrowly. Now, what if you are in scope? What does it mean, Niels? Are there then reporting obligations? What exactly is the impact of being in scope of DAX 7 and for who?
So the impact of being in scope, so as you mentioned in the beginning, the reporting obligation is applicable to the platform operator. So the platform operator will need to adhere to several requirements or obligations. They will need to collect the relevant information from reportable sellers. They will need to do due diligence on that data that is being gathered from the reportable sellers, and they will need to report relevant information to the government. And then finally, of course, they need to collect and keep that collected information as well. I mentioned the definition of reportable sellers. So all those requirements relate to the reportable sellers. That are sellers that have been doing relevant activities via your platform for the reporting period. Reporting period, that is a calendar year. So from 1st of January until the end of the year. There are, of course, also exclusions relating to the sellers on which reporting platform operators need to report. Those are called excluded sellers. There are 4 types of sellers that are included in the legislation. First one is the government entities. So on those, if they are doing activities over your platform operators do not need to report on those activities. Entities from which the stock is traded on a securities market or related entities to those, also not to be reported on. Entities for which the platform operator facilitated more than 2,000 relevant activities by means of rental of a movable property relating to a property listing. What do I mean with that? That relates to the big hotel chains that are, for example, renting out rooms in their hotel via a platform. If that hotel chain is renting out more than 2,000 times rooms relating to one single hotel, then a platform operator do not need to report on that entity or the activities of that entity. And then finally, that's the fourth exclusion. That is sellers for which the platform operator has facilitated less than 30 relevant activities by means of the sale of goods, and for which the total amount of the consideration paid did not exceed 2,000 euros during the reporting period. So that's really to exclude the sellers that are just selling goods on a marketplace 2 times a year with the total value below 2,000 euros, to also diminish a bit the administrative burden on those marketplace providers. So platform operators, as I mentioned, do not need to report on the activities of those sellers on their platform. But that doesn't mean that they're not in scope, so they can still be in scope. Now, if they only have sellers that are excluded active on their platform, in that situation, it can be that the platform needs to file a so-called nil return. So that's on the excluded sellers and on the reporting obligation. So as I mentioned, 4 obligations: collection of data. Collection of the data needs to be done by the 31st of December of the reporting period. So for 2025, that's the 31st of December of 2025. By that date, also the reporting, the platform operator needs to do so-called due diligence. They need to check whether the information that they have collected from those sellers is correct or not. And then thirdly, they need to report that data to the government. I think one small topic on perhaps the country of reporting, and then Pieter, I will give the word back to you. So the reporting, where does that need to be done by the platform operator? As I mentioned, it's an EU reporting obligation, and the platform operator only needs to report this data in one EU country. Where is that? It depends on whether the platform operator is an EU business or a non-EU business. As I mentioned in the beginning, also non-EU platforms can be impacted by DAX 7. If it's an EU business that is operating the platform, then in principle they will need to report in the country where they are resident for tax purposes. If they are a non-EU business, for example, an American business that is operating an American platform, then they can still be impacted by DAX 7 if they have sellers active on their platform which are EU citizens, or they are supporting or facilitating the rental of an immovable property that is located in the EU. For example, me as a Belgian citizen use an American platform to do a sale of goods above the threshold, then the platform can still be in scope. In that situation, the platform operator has the option or had the option between all the countries from which he has reportable sellers active on his platform. So if he has sellers located in Belgium, Spain, France, then he has the option between those 3 countries on where to report for DAX 7.
Thanks, Niels. Interesting. I was making myself the reflection that a platform which would facilitate the sale of second-hand goods would, if I occasionally put something I have on sale on website, and that's a few times a year, less than 2,000 euro, the platform would be a reportable platform, but not necessarily has to report me. if I do a big cleanup in my house and I sell multiple objects for more than 2,000 euro on that platform, that year I might become reportable as a seller on that platform. And that would then allow the authorities to verify if I'm actually just an individual once in a lifetime doing some cleanup and sales, or whether I'm actually starting a business online and on a regular basis is selling goods via the platform. Interesting, very interesting. Now, you said something interesting on the data collection and the due diligence. Jeroen, you are working with a lot of companies on data for DAX 7 and for other purposes. I imagine this must create particular additional challenges when DAX 7 comes into play, and all of a sudden due diligence is needed on the data.
Yes, indeed, Peter. So what we see in practice is that maybe first of all to highlight which data points need to be reported. So there the information that needs to be reported is obviously the information from the seller, or it be like an individual or an entity. Besides that, also the tax identification number. And like for example, if it's an individual, it would be the national number or the VAT number in case it would be a company. And besides that, also of course the information of where or the entity or the person is located, so like the address, the postcode, and so on. Also, an important thing to note is that the bank account number to which the payout of the services is also to be reported. And then besides that, of course, also the activities, the amounts which are paid out, and also the fees or the taxes which are already being withheld. But of course, when you have to do this type of reporting, you of course want to report the right data points. So there it's important to have a sort of validation process when there is an intake of a new reportable seller. So meaning that you can verify whether the information which the person or the company provide is valid by having some controls in place. For example, if it would be like a company where you would ask like for an extract of the KBO, or that you do it by yourself to do that validation. In case like or in view of the bank account statements, that the person or the company also provides a proof that they are the owner of that account. But also when you are working with individuals, that you have a sort of control to validate that it's really them that will be working for you. So one thing that you can do is, for example, ask for a copy uh, of the identification card. Yeah, just to make sure that the information which is being provided is, of course, valid.
Yeah, thanks, Jeroen. So I imagine for a lot of platforms, DAX 7 means, verifying the procedures, verifying whether the steps are there to check on the information. All, of course, keeping in mind GDPR legislation and other legislation that requires also procedures to handle this kind of information. If you work with companies to do the actual DAX 7 reportings, Jeroen, what are the common challenges that you see?
Yeah, so what we see in practice is that sometimes the quality of the data is not always present because maybe the way that the intake process is not like not all validations are in place. For example, that the people that register themselves can just put in a random address without that being validated, or like or the national number, which is also but being registered, but that there's also no validation on what is right or wrong. Because the reason why I'm saying this is that when you would submit the XML file or for DAX 7, that there is a control on these national numbers. So in case you by yourself do not have this control in place, it will be validated by the Belgian tax authority, and then if in case you would notice that there are some issues, then it's your responsibility to, of course, make sure that the data that is being reported is correct, of course.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jeroen. I can see that. So the challenge comes in when you need to do the reporting. And yeah, Niels, I think reportings are due sometime now in January. So, but I wonder, what if then errors occur, or what if certain information is not reported that should have been reported? What are the actual consequences, Niels? Can you maybe elaborate also a little bit on that?
Yes, of course, Pieter. And indeed, as you mentioned, a good onboarding process is important to allow for the collection of all the data points already from the beginning, right? Because if in January you are preparing your DAX 7 report and you see that certain data is missing, then of course it can already be a year after their onboarding of those sellers, and it can be very difficult to gather that information still. And of course there are penalties that are included in the legislation for platform operators, which are filing too late or filing incomplete or incorrect DAX 7 reports. There are monetary penalties with infractions, or with penalties per infraction ranging between 1.5 and 2.5k euros. But also in the worst case scenario, if platforms really are not complying with DAX 7, the legislation mentioned that they can be disallowed for continuing their activities within the EU. Now, that's really a worst case scenario, but I think the monetary penalties, that's certainly something that businesses need to be aware of, and of course need to implement those processes that we mentioned: a good onboarding with good collection, a good due diligence to allow for early spotting of missing data or incorrect data, to allow for a smooth reporting, which indeed is due by the 31st of January of the year following the reporting period. So indeed, for the reporting period 2025, it's already the 31st of January. So the deadline is rapidly approaching.
Okay, thank you, Niels and Jeroen. I think that brings us towards the end of the podcast. So I found it extremely interesting. So for those listeners who do work with platforms, digital solutions, and so on, and who have not yet considered DAX 7, I think it's the right thing to do. Just check whether you could be in scope and whether any obligations apply. For those who know that they are in scope, this is just a kind reminder that end of January is approaching very fast, and that the obligations are due. Before I stop the podcast, Niels, Jeroen, I'm going to ask you just one last key message that you would give to the audience in respect of DAX 7. Maybe, Niels, let's start with you. What's your key recommendation?
Of course, I think key recommendation, the scope of DAX 7 is very broad. We see cases where platforms are in scope where you would not expect it initially. So do your assessment internally. Deadlines for 2025 are due by the 31st of January already. So be prepared. And also, key message, this is not limited to EU platforms. Also non-EU platforms can be in scope, and also other non-EU countries are implementing similar requirements, such as Canada, UK, New Zealand. So it is a rising topic to be aware of.
Yeah, and Jeroen, what's your key point?
Yeah, so I think when you would have to report that, of course, you make sure to have the sufficient validation controls in place, but also know that the Belgian tax authority has also a tool where you can, with some manual works, create an XML file, but it's only limited to 40 entries. But know that in case it would be more than 40, 40 reportable sellers, that you can always also reach out to us to help you further with the XML conversion.
All right. Thank you very much, Niels, Jeroen, and the audience, of course, for tuning in to the podcast. And hope to see you again in the next episode. Thank you.